Hello, and I'm so glad that I can be with you, at least in this form. I would really like to thank Fiona and the other panel organisers for making this possible, and I'm just sorry I can't be there in person to attend all the other fascinating sounding papers. So this paper is essentially about paradigms and genuine scientific exploration and engagement with things we do not yet understand. It reflects my strong view that anthropology can make significant contributions to our understanding of consciousness and the full spectrum of the human experience. There are two key aspects which I believe position anthropology particularly well to make this contribution. The first is our relationship with peoples whose paradigms of the world are not confined to materialism, but whose worldview normally involves both physical and extra-physical dimensions. In other words, as anthropologists, we are consistently confronted with experiences and worldviews that challenge and go beyond our own cultural preconceptions. The second aspect is the requirement of our positioning as cultural translators to go beyond the paradigms and interpretations of our informants and to continuously seek to distill universal human principles that underpin cultural variation and thereby develop new models of understanding the human experience. I have in other papers drawn on the out-of-body experience or projection of consciousness to challenge the standard material paradigm. And this paper I will again try and push for changes to our paradigm, but I'm drawing on another experience, one that I think is of a different order from the OBE, which is so well studied and so well recorded now. This paper was prompted by accounts of seemingly impossible human feats provided by Aboriginal people of the Australian Western Desert. They were the type of accounts that non-Aboriginal people could easily dismiss with a knowing smile from within the security of their own paradigm that they were simply old wives' tales. But if we move beyond that security into a space of genuine scientific inquiry, we need to consider whether these accounts are in fact simply indications of cultural beliefs, or whether they might in fact be pointing to an understanding of reality that reflects genuine experience rather than simply misguided tralitious beliefs. The ethnographic data for this paper is derived from the Western Desert of Australia, a region which is the largest homogeneous cultural block in Australia, stretching from the west, from not far off the coast in Western Australia, all across the desert areas to places like Coober and Oodnadatta in South Australia in the east, and from the south, from the Nullarbor Plain, into the north to communities like Balgo and Yuendumu in the Northern Territory. The Western Desert is one of the main bastions of traditional Aboriginal culture in Australia, and it is widely known for its conservative approach to ceremonial business. Men from all across Australia still come to the Western Desert to go through the law, which basically means achieving full classificatory manhood by going through initiation ceremonies. As well as maintaining this bedrock of the classical Aboriginal religious system, the Western Desert is also one of the few areas to still produce a significant number of traditional Aboriginal healers. These healers, known as Ngankari, could broadly be considered to be part of the shamanic spectrum, drawing in their practice on the manipulation of, apparently according to their own accounts, subtle energies and spiritual forces. Soon after starting work with Aboriginal communities in South Australia, I was told the story of a man called Aeroplane George, and since then I've been told this story at least half a dozen times. According to this account, Aeroplane George derived his name from his uncanny ability to travel at great speed. With various varying detail, the normal story went that people would see Aeroplane George at one town. As they boarded a train, he waved them goodbye, and by the time they reached their destination, he was already there waiting for them. And it wasn't just Aboriginal people who met Aeroplane George. When he died in 1978, there was an obituary in the newspaper which read, "Many a tourist was puzzled at seeing George at Coober and then upon arrival at Culgara, they would be greeted by Aeroplane George. No one knows how George managed to travel so fast. When I was first told these stories, I already had a long-standing interest in so-called paranormal phenomena, and I noted it together with many other accounts of meetings of spirits or out-of-body experiences. And all of these accounts were related essentially as if they were commonplace and natural by the Aboriginal people I spoke with. But it was not until several years later that I met a man, a Pitjantjatjara man, called Murray, who claimed to have had the same experience as George. After telling me about some of his other experiences, such as out-of-body experiences, he described something he experienced when he was a young man, where some old men showed him and a group of youngsters something that he referred to as walpa, or wind. He described this as a skill involving the use of emu feathers and certain songs which allowed them all as a group to travel from Ernabella to Alice Springs and back in 2 or 3 hours. This is a return journey of about 660 kilometers through the desert as the crow flies, much longer if you follow the roads. On this trip, the group apparently passed through hills, cars, buildings. They entered a bank vault and saw a lot of money there, but the old men made it very clear that they weren't allowed to take any. Murray said that this was the skill that Aeroplane George used. He said that he was a bit ambivalent about this skill because people could use it to steal things. Despite my long-term interest in these matters, this account seemed somewhat fanciful to me. I had studied OBEs for many years, I'd met many people who'd had them, and I'd experienced them myself. And I understood that in that experience, people often passed through solid objects, and it made sense because in an OBE, you are not in a physical body, you are using some other form of vehicle that is more subtle. So I double-checked. Are you sure you're not talking about spirit journeys? He was very clear. No, this was not a spirit journey. His physical body had gone on this trip. So it would have been easy to dismiss this experience as just one step too far. But of course doing so would have been hypocritical. If I were to only accept those accounts that I could relate to from my own personal experience, my position would be just yet another variation of the paradigmatic way of cutting out certain experiences as just simply not being possible. So I'm saying, I should emphasize in this that I'm not saying that we should just blindly accept everything that people say, every belief and every account of an experience, but yes, that we do need to have an open mind so we can engage in genuine inquiry. So as I looked into it, I discovered that Elkin had reported the phenomenon of fast travelling in his classic and still unrivaled account of Australian Aboriginal shamanism, as occurring among numerous groups in Australia. And he in turn drew parallels between this account and accounts that he had found coming from Tibet. So clearly this is not an isolated phenomena that just derives from some localized delusion. I consulted the work of the Brazilian consciousness researcher Valdo Vieira. He focuses on OBEs, but nonetheless provides a comprehensive discussion of many other phenomena that surround that. And among these, he has discussed something that he calls parateleportation, the name that I've used for this paper. And he defines it like this: a phenomenon composed of dematerialization, levitation, apport, and rematerialization in which the intraphysical consciousness suddenly disappears and reappears in another location. The act or process of transporting objects, human beings, or subhuman animals through space without any mechanical means. Vieira then identifies 24 frequent characteristics of this experience, including relevantly just 3 that I'll cite. Firstly, that the phenomenon is not planned or desired by the person experiencing it. That the phenomenon usually only involves one person. And finally, that the person experiencing it usually has no self-awareness or recollection of the period between disappearance and reappearance. The account given to me by Murray, of course, differs on all these accounts, as the experience was deliberately induced by a group of men and experienced as a conscious journey. Similarly, the apparent ubiquity of Aeroplane George's fast travels suggests some degree of conscious control over the phenomenon. A key reference in Vieira's analysis is a book going back now to the 1960s by somebody called Fodor. I presume that's how it's pronounced, Fodor. And he provides a summary of accounts of the experience in historic texts and in the context of mediumistic sessions. Accepting the consistency with which this phenomenon has been reported in the mediumistic literature, as summarised by Photo, as carrying some weight, it certainly appears as if in rare circumstances human bodies can traverse space, including physical objects, in ways that's as yet not understood. Many of the mediumistic accounts bear out Vieira's suggestion that the phenomena usually involves an unconscious medium. The usual pattern appears to be that the dematerialization is provoked by extra-physical consciousnesses or spirits, while the medium is in a trance state. A partial exception among the cases reported by Fodor is one that took place in 1871 and involved the serial parateleportation first of a medium called Mrs. Guppy and then of two other mediums whose seance had in fact provoked the whole affair. The latter two both recalled interactions with other physical people at brief stops in the course of being parateleported from one location to another and then returned. On their return, they also brought back objects that they'd been given in their brief sojourn somewhere along the way. This provides, of course, support to Murray's expressed belief that he could have taken money from the bank vault if he'd wanted to. In summary, there is, in my view, sufficient supportive information to warrant taking seriously the accounts by Aboriginal people, or at least not just cutting them off straight away. In fact, it appears that the Aboriginal cultural context could provide a privileged environment for its study, because unlike the general spontaneous and involuntary occurrence among Western mediums, Aboriginal people appear to have a ceremonially encoded methodology that offers a high level of control and replicability over this experience. So I want to conclude this paper with a brief discussion of the importance of paradigms in understanding this phenomenon, paradigms and worldviews, which apply to this phenomenon and multidimensional phenomena more broadly. It is, in my view, incumbent on the researcher to start with the hypothesis that accounts that he or she receives are genuine. Fantasy, fraud, delusion, deceit are, of course, all possibilities, but in my view, they don't represent productive starting points. We may eventually arrive at the conclusion that those are factors at play, but in my view, we need to precede this conclusion with careful inquiry. In my case, I did not have the opportunity to pursue the account with further research. Ideally, the participant observer would, of course, not only seek other informants on the topic, but participation in the described ceremony. For the purposes of this paper, I will assume that the accounts about Aeroplane George and by my informant are accurate. In that case, they clearly point to a reality that is broader than our conventional paradigm allows for. The difference between the way the experience manifests in Aboriginal culture and the way it does at the fringes of our cultures, i.e. in the spiritualist circles, could plausibly be explained on the basis of the different worldviews in operation. Firstly, mediums in our culture are already operating outside the mainstream paradigm. Every aspect of mediumship is subject to derision, criticism, and incredulity on behalf of most of the other members of the medium's own cultural group. Within the contained reality of the mediums and people who accept their approach, the mediumistic tradition is essentially passive, which means that the medium enters a trance to allow the work of spirits, or in some traditions of God, to be done through them. It is the extra-physical consciousnesses, or the spirits, who are in control. In Aboriginal culture, on the other hand, the phenomenon of fast travelling is embedded in an overall worldview in which it is not only plausible, but even almost expected. The creation narratives of the dreaming, which provide the blueprint for human society, are replete with accounts of supernatural feats by the creation beings. In the traditional philosophy, every human being who participates in ceremony across a lifetime has the potential to ultimately embody these creation beings, who are considered both the spiritual and, in a very broad sense of the word, genetic origin of humanity. They are the ultimate ancestors from which everybody has come, from whom everybody has come. And anything that was done by these creation beings is potentially available to humans as well. Reaching a state where a person can induce this and other kinds of paranormal phenomena is consequently built into the expected life trajectory of at least some members of the community, and it is accepted by all. A second significant difference between mediums in Aboriginal culture is the notion of agency. I believe the ultimate question of the locus of agency in Aboriginal culture is very complex and would involve careful consideration of kinship networks and the position of the individual as a link in the chain of ancestral traditions. It's beyond the scope of this paper. But what is most relevant here is that unlike the European medium, the Aboriginal ceremonial leader knows that he or she can achieve particular results through the technology of song and ritual. And I use the word technology here deliberately to show that there is a clear causal link between certain actions and an expected outcome. In singing the requisite songs, the human actor is evoking and drawing on powers that surpass him, i.e. the ancestral beings. But rather than submit to their superior powers, the humans are, in a sense, temporarily aligning themselves and essentially occupying the same ontological space as those ancestors. So beyond this brief comparison of the cultural distinctions between mediums and Aboriginal people who have experience the same phenomena, what paradigm would work for anthropological analysis? In brief, my view is that it should allow for the engagement with the experience as a possible reality. And I assume that there are various ways in which this could be achieved. One might be through quantum mechanics, in which area I do not profess any knowledge or competency, but I'm sure there are models there that would allow for an understanding of dematerialization and rematerialization of matter. But my personal preference is for a paradigm that was originally stipulated by Vieira, that I have adopted following long-term study of energy and of psychic phenomena, including the out-of-body experience. This paradigm essentially considers the manifestation of life, consciousness, to occur on a range of interconnected, yet seemingly distinct energetic frequencies. In addition to the gross physical dimension we're all aware of every day, there are other more subtle dimensions that we can experience, for example, through the out-of-body experience, or that we can perceive if our antennas are tuned correctly. From this perspective, physical matter is simply one way in which energy can manifest. And while it is more solid than these other more subtle energies, if the circumstances are right, it can still experience the same kind of phenomena as the subtle energies. There are other key elements to this paradigm which I don't have time to go into here, but it is important to emphasize that while it may be simple for me to summarize this paradigm as I've just done here, it is not a simplistic model, nor is the reality that it's pointing to unremarkable. On the contrary, the reality it points to is vast, complex, and awe-inspiring, and it is precisely for this reason that every attempt that we might make to understand it is valuable. In the case of parateleportation, the challenge for us as European trained anthropologists in the first instance is to approach it with an open mind. This is the first challenge before we can even contemplate the next step, which is to explore the possibility of pursuing the experience ourselves so as to understand it and the reality of our informants from the inside. Thank you very much, and I hope you have a great conference. Bye.